For the third time in 2 weeks, a man in a worn gray jacket is being told he cannot come into the gallery, and for the third time, he does not argue. It is not that he was loud. It is not that he did anything wrong. It is that the director took one look at the jacket, the old boots, the quiet ordinariness of him, and decided, the way he decided about a dozen people a day now, that this was not the sort of visitor the gallery was for anymore. The man nodded, the way he had nodded the first time and the second time. He looked for a moment through the tall glass doors at the paintings glowing on the white walls inside. Then he turned and walked back out onto the street, where a small group of other people stood, people who had also been turned away that afternoon for the same unspoken reason, and he did something the director, watching through the glass, could not understand. He started talking to them, quietly, one by one, like he was gathering them. 4 days later, the man in the gray jacket came back, and this time, he did not come alone. There were nearly 40 people on the sidewalk behind him. The old man in work clothes who used to come every week, the young mother with 2 kids who'd been told children were disruptive, a 16-year-old girl with a sketchbook held against her chest like a shield. All of them, the ones who had been quietly turned away, standing together behind a man in a worn jacket, who was, though almost none of them knew it yet, the person who had built the entire gallery in the first place. He owned every brick of it, every painting on every wall. And 3 times, the man he had hired to run it had thrown him out of it. What happened on that 4th visit is the reason I am telling you this story. There is a gallery in West Oakland called the Foundry, and it was built to do something that almost no gallery in the world does. It was built to be free. It sits in a converted iron foundry, a huge brick building with tall arched windows, in a neighborhood of working people, body shops, and corner stores. 6 years ago, it opened its doors with a radical and simple idea behind it. No tickets, no membership, no velvet rope. The notion that a child who had never set foot in a museum, a mechanic on his lunch break, an old woman with nowhere warm to go, could walk in off the street and stand 3 feet from a real Rembrandt, a real Turner, a wall of contemporary work worth more than the whole block, and that the art would belong to them, in that moment, exactly as much as it belonged to anyone. The collection was extraordinary, which is what confused people. Free galleries are usually free because there's nothing much in them. The Foundry was free and full of masterpieces. Nobody could quite explain how a neighborhood gallery in West Oakland had a Rembrandt on the wall. The answer was that one man had quietly bought the building, bought or loaned the art, and set the whole thing up through a foundation so that it could stay free forever, and had asked, as he always asked, that his name appear nowhere. For its first 3 years, the Foundry was exactly what it was meant to be. It was loud, in the good way. School groups. Old men arguing about a painting. Teenagers sprawled on the benches with sketchbooks. A mechanic named Reggie Dawkins who came every Friday on his way home, still in his coveralls, and stood in front of the Rembrandt for 10 minutes like a man saying his prayers. Then, the board hired a new director. A brilliant one, by every credential. And over the next 3 years, very gradually, the Foundry stopped being free in every way that mattered, except the price. There was no dress code on paper. But somehow, the people in work clothes stopped feeling welcome. There was no rule against children. But somehow families with kids were steered toward the exit. The benches were removed, because sprawling teenagers disrupted the contemplative atmosphere. A new kind of docent appeared, the kind who materialized at your shoulder the moment you looked like you didn't belong, and asked, with perfect politeness, whether they could help you find your way out. Attendants from the neighborhood, the whole reason the place existed, fell by more than half. But the art press had never written about the foundry so much. It had never been so respected. The director considered this a triumph. The man who founded it noticed the numbers, because he noticed everything quietly. And so, in a worn gray jacket telling no one who he was, he went to see his own gallery for himself. He was Keanu Reeves. And his own director turned him away at the door. The director was named Edmund Thorne. And to understand this story, you have to understand him, because he is not a snob in the way the word usually means. What is wrong with Edmund Thorne is far sadder and far more human than snobbery. At 56, Edmund Thorne was one of the most respected curators in the country, and he had taken the strange little free gallery in West Oakland and made the art world take it seriously. He believed, with his whole heart, that he was protecting something sacred. And to understand why, you have to go back to the worst winter of his life. Edmund Thorne was 19, and he wanted to die. His mother had passed that autumn, the only person who had ever truly seen him, and the grief had hollowed him out so completely that by December he had made a kind of quiet peace with not being alive much longer. He walked the city for hours in the cold because he could not bear to be in his empty apartment. And one gray afternoon, to get warm, with no other reason on earth, he walked into an art museum. He wandered the halls without seeing anything, and then he turned a corner and stopped in front of a small painting. A Rembrandt, an old man's face, half in shadow, the eyes carrying decades of sorrow, and somehow, impossibly, a kind of peace on the other side of it. Edmund stood in front of that painting for 2 hours. He could not have told you why. But something in that 400-year-old face, that stranger who had also clearly known the worst of things and survived it, reached across the centuries and took hold of him and would not let him go. He walked out of that museum, in the dark, still alive. The painting had kept him alive. He devoted his entire life to art after that, and who could blame him? Art had literally saved him. But here is where the wound twisted, the way wounds do. Because Edmund came to believe that what had saved him was the holiness of art. Its silence, its seriousness, its sacredness. And that this holiness was fragile and had to be protected. From noise, from distraction, from the casual and the careless, from people who would stand in front of that same Rembrandt and take a selfie and walk away in 10 seconds, profaning the very thing that had reached into his grief and saved his life. He became, without ever meaning to, a priest of a religion with a congregation of one. And a priest who believes the temple is sacred will, eventually, decide that most people are not worthy to enter it. Edmund looked at the loud families and the teenagers and the men in coveralls, and he did not see his 19-year-old self, desperate, grieving, wandering in out of the cold. He saw a threat to the silence. So he cleared them out, gently, certain he was protecting the sacred. He could not see the cruelest irony of his own life. The boy he had been, broke, grieving, in a worn coat, with no business in a fine museum, was exactly the kind of person Edmund Thorne now turned away at the door. He had become the man who would have stopped his own salvation before it ever reached him. The first time Keanu came, Edmund himself was at the front, and he gave the man in the gray jacket the smooth, regretful treatment he had perfected. The gallery was quite full. Perhaps another time there were some lovely calves down the street. Keanu nodded and left. He thought, that first time, that it might have been a misunderstanding. The second time, 3 days later, he watched it happen to other people before it happened to him. He watched a young mother named Yolanda, with 2 small kids, get steered toward the exit by a docent who explained that the current exhibition required a quiet environment. watched a 16-year-old girl with a sketchbook get told, kindly, that sketching wasn't permitted near the permanent collection, which was a lie. It never had been forbidden. Keanu had specifically wanted kids to sketch, and watched her face fall and watched her leave. Then they got to him, and the gallery was once again, somehow, too full for one more man in a worn jacket. So this time, Keanu did not just leave. He went out onto the sidewalk, and he talked to the people who'd been turned away with him. The old man in coveralls was Reggie Dawkins, 68, retired now from 40 years fixing transit buses. "I came every Friday for 3 years," Reggie told him. Not bitter, just sad. Stood in front of that Rembrandt. The old fella with the sad eyes. He felt like a friend. Then about a year ago, they started looking at me like I tracked something in. So I stopped coming. Figured it wasn't for people like me anymore. I guess it never really was. The 16-year-old was named Mara. She held her sketchbook against her chest the whole time she talked. She wanted to be a painter. She had no money for classes, no museum nearby. Nothing, except that for a while there had been a free gallery with real paintings she could sit and copy, learning the way painters have always learned, by sitting at the feet of the masters. "It was the only place I could learn," she said. "I taught myself so much just sitting in there." And then the new guys started, and the benches went away, and they made me feel like a criminal for opening my sketchbook. So, she shrugged. The way kids shrug when they're protecting themselves from a hope they've decided to give up. "Whatever, it's fine." It was not fine. Keanu heard that. In all of them. The quiet way people talk when they've decided that something beautiful was never really meant for them, and they've made their peace with the smallness that decision leaves behind. He came a third time, alone to be sure. He was turned away a third time. And by then he had made up his mind about what to do. So he found Reggie, and Yolanda, and Mara, and a few dozen others, the regulars who had quietly stopped coming, the neighborhood people who'd gotten the message that the foundry was no longer theirs. And he asked them all to meet him at the gallery on Saturday. He didn't tell them why. He just asked them to come, and to come together. On Saturday, Edmund Thorne looked up from the front desk to see the man in the worn gray jacket standing at the glass doors again, and behind him, filling the sidewalk, nearly 40 people. Edmund came out, his pleasant administrator's smile already in place, the smile that moved people along. "I'm sorry," he began, "but we can't accommodate a group of this, Sis. We're not a group," Keanu said, mildly. "We're just people who'd like to look at the art. The same as anyone. Sir, I've asked you before, you have. 3 times. Keanu's voice stayed gentle, but it carried, and the small crowd behind him had gone quiet, and so had the visitors inside who drifted toward the commotion. 3 times you've turned me away from this building, and while you were turning me away, I watched you turn away a woman with 2 kids, and a retired man who came here every Friday for 3 years, and a 16-year-old girl who was teaching herself to paint off your walls because she had nowhere else in the world to learn." He nodded back at the crowd. "These are some of the people you've quietly told this place isn't for. I asked them to come back with me today. I didn't want to come alone." Edmund's smile had stiffened. "I don't know who you think you are. I think I'm the person who built this gallery," Keanu said quietly. "I bought the building. The collection on those walls is mine, or it's on loan because I asked for it. I set the whole thing up to be free, forever, so that a kid like her," he glanced at Mara, "could walk in off the street and stand in front of a Rembrandt and have it belong to her as much as to anybody. That was the entire point. That was the only point." He let it land. And 3 times this week, you threw me out of it, which I don't mind. But you threw them out too, and that I mind very much." The lobby had gone absolutely silent. A young guard near the wall had stopped breathing. Edmund Thorne's face had drained white as the gallery walls. Keanu did not press it in front of the crowd. Instead, he asked the one quiet question that the man could not answer. "You built a temple in here, Edmund," he said. "I can see how beautiful it is. But I have to ask, when you turn away the loud ones, the broke ones, the ones in the wrong clothes, the ones who'd never normally set foot in a place like this, are you protecting the art from them? Or are you protecting it from the person you used to be?" Edmund Thorne opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Keanu would not let it become a public execution. He asked Edmund if they could speak alone, and they went into the director's office, a beautiful room, spare and perfect, and the 2 men sat down, the founder and the director who had thrown him out 3 times. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," Keanu said. "I want you to hear that. You feel like your whole world is ending right now, in front of everyone, and that's not what I want. I came because I think something happened to you, somewhere, that turned a man who clearly loves art into a man who guards it like a dragon. So tell me, the real version." And, maybe because there was nothing left to defend, Edmund Thorne told a stranger about the worst winter of his life. He told him about being 19, and his mother dying, and the grief that hollowed him out until he had made his quiet peace with not being alive much longer. He told him about walking into a museum out of the cold with no reason on earth, and turning a corner, and standing for 2 hours in front of a small Rembrandt, an old man's face, half in shadow, sorrow and peace in the same eyes, and walking out of that museum still alive because of it. "It saved me," Edmund said, and his voice broke on it. "A painting saved my life, so I gave my life to it, and I thought I was protecting it. The silence, the seriousness, the holiness of it, from people who'd cheapen it, who'd glance at it and take a photo and never even." He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. Keanu was quiet for a long moment. Then he told him something true. "I've spent a lot of my life around people who think the precious thing has to be protected from the crowd," he said. "And I've lost enough, myself, people I loved, years I'm still not over, to understand the pull of it. When something saves you, you want to put it behind glass. You want to make sure nobody touches it carelessly, because to you it isn't a painting, it's the thing that kept you alive." He leaned forward. "But here's what you've got backwards, Edmund, and I say this gently, because I think it's the most important thing anyone could tell you. That 19-year-old who walked in out of the cold, broke, grieving, no business, in a fine museum, in a worn coat, planning not to be alive much longer. That's the kid you turn away at this door now, 20 times a day. You've built a temple so sacred that the boy you used to be couldn't get in. The boy the Rembrandt saved would be standing on the sidewalk." Edmund Thorne sat completely still. "That girl out there," Keanu said. "Mara, 16, teaching herself to paint off my walls because she's got nowhere else. You threw her out. You, of all people. She is exactly who that Rembrandt was waiting for. She is you, in the cold, in the worst winter of her life, except she doesn't even know yet how much she needs it." He paused. "What happens to that girl, Edmund, if everybody keeps her on the sidewalk?" Edmund Thorne closed his eyes. It was a long time before he opened them. When Edmund Thorne came back out of his office, he did not go to the front desk. He walked to the glass doors, and he opened them, both of them, all the way, and he stood aside. and to the 40 people on the sidewalk, in a voice that was not steady and that he did not try to steady, he said the only thing there was to say. "Please," he said, "come in. All of you. I'm sorry. The doors should never have been closed to you. They won't be again." They came in slowly, uncertain, half expecting a trick. Reggie Dawkins walked straight to the Rembrandt and stood in front of the old man with the sad eyes, and after a moment Edmund came and stood beside him. Two men of an age looking at the same 400-year-old face, and Edmund said something quiet, and Reggie laughed, and something between them was mended that neither of them could have named. And Edmund found Mara, the 16-year-old with the sketchbook held against her chest like a shield, and he did the thing that mattered most. He pulled one of the old benches out of storage himself, carried it out into the gallery in his perfect suit, and set it down in front of the permanent collection. And he said to her, "Sit, open your book. Sketch anything you want, as long as you want. And come find me when you're done, because I think you and I should talk about where you study next." Mara's eyes filled, and she was pretending hard that they hadn't, and she sat down on the bench and opened her sketchbook with shaking hands. Keanu watched all of it from the back, near the doors, and when Edmund finally crossed the room to him, the director did not give a speech. He just put out his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for not letting me keep being that. I don't think anyone else would have bothered." Keanu took his hand and gave him the real smile. The warm one, the slightly crooked one, the unhurried one. "That's all I needed to see," he said. Then, while the gallery filled up with the noise it was built for, kids and arguments, and a 16-year-old's pencil scratching against paper, the man in the worn gray jacket slipped out the doors he had just reopened and walked off down the West Oakland street and was gone before anyone thought to ask his name. Here is the part the easy version of this story leaves out. Because a reopened door is the dramatic part, and what a place becomes over years is the part that's actually true. It did not all heal in an afternoon. Edmund Thorne had spent 3 years training his staff and shaping the culture, and you do not undo that in a day. Some of the art world admirers who had loved the new serious foundry drifted away when it got loud again, and there were months when Edmund wondered if he had simply traded one kind of failure for another. He tried, once, to resign. He felt he had no right to run a place he'd nearly ruined. It was Reggie Dawkins, of all people, who talked him out of it, on a Friday, in front of the Rembrandt. "Leaving's easy," the old mechanic said. "You'd feel real noble walking out that door. Staying, and being the guy who reopens the place he closed, that's the hard one. Do the hard one." So Edmund did the hard one. And he changed. The benches came back. The school groups came back. He personally rewrote the gallery's guiding principle and had it carved over the inner doors, where everyone could see it. This art belongs to whoever needs it. He instituted a rule that he himself found almost unbearable, given who he had been, and which he came to consider the most important thing he ever did: that no one, for any reason, was ever to be made to feel they did not belong in that building. He stopped being a priest guarding a temple and became something better, a man who held a door open. And Mara, the 16-year-old who taught herself to paint off the walls, Edmund Thorne took her on, not as charity. He saw what was in that sketchbook, and he knew. He arranged a scholarship, mentored her himself, and over the next few years watched a self-taught kid from West Oakland become a real painter. When she had her first show at a different gallery, a serious one, the kind that would once have turned her away at the door, Edmund sat in the front row and wept like a fool. And Reggie Dawkins came in his good suit. And somewhere in the back, in a worn gray jacket, A man nobody recognized stood quietly for a while, and then left before the speeches. Years from now there will be a wall in some museum with one of Mara's paintings on it. People will stand in front of it the way Edmund once stood in front of a Rembrandt. And some of them will be broke and grieving and wandering in out of the cold, and the doors will be open, because she will have made sure of it. That is how a thing gets passed on. One open door at a time. Edmund kept on the wall of his office a small print of the Rembrandt that saved him. The old man half in shadow, sorrow and peace in the same eyes. He looked at it every morning, not to remember the painting, to remember the boy who'd needed it, and to make sure he never closed a door on that boy again. I've told a lot of stories on this channel, but I keep coming back to this one, and it took me a while to understand why. It would be easy to make this a story about a snob getting humbled, the gatekeeper who threw out the owner and got what was coming. But that's not the part that stays with me. The part that stays with me is that Edmund wasn't protecting the art from the crowd. He was protecting it from his own grief. Something saved his life when he was 19 and broken, and he loved it so much and was so terrified of it being cheapened that he ended up locking out the exact kind of desperate, ordinary person he had been, the kind who needed it most. And I think there's a quiet warning in that for all of us. The things we love most, we sometimes guard so hard that we keep them from the very people they were meant for. What reached him wasn't getting caught. It was a man asking whether he was protecting the art from the crowd or from the boy he used to be. I don't know if I'd have brought 40 people back to a place that had thrown me out 3 times, instead of just calling a lawyer and being done with it. I'd like to think I would have, but honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us aren't sure. The satisfying thing and the good thing aren't always the same thing, and we don't always pick the second one. And maybe that's the point. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for quiet generosity and for believing that beautiful things belong to everyone, not just to the people who can afford them. If it stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me the line that got you. I read every single one of them. And if you know someone who's ever been made to feel that something beautiful wasn't meant for people like them, share this with them. It might be the thing they needed to hear today. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe and stick around. There's another coming that I think you'll feel. See you in the next one.